Hi, this is Robert Mugge, director of, among many other things, Saxophone Colossus starring Sonny Rollins, and you're watching Mr. Media.
I'm Bob Andelman, and this is Mr. Media Interview. You can see, hear, and read more than 1,000 of my previous celebrity interviews at MrMedia.com. That's mrmedia.com. Subscribe to the show on YouTube, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Apple News, Google Play, or Stitcher, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. On today's show, I'll talk to Robert Mugge, director of the new documentary Saxophone Colossus. It's a portrait of Sonny Rollins. Stick around. Does anybody really understand jazz? Okay, hands down, hands down. It was a rhetorical question. For me, it's all about mood, rhythm, sway, and surprise. Good jazz changes your emotions and takes you places full of surprise and invention. And that, I imagine, is what attracted documentary filmmaker Robert Mugge to his latest project, Saxophone Colossus, which is a portrait of Sonny Rollins. Mugge, after all, calls Rollins the greatest jazz improviser. Of course, he started that in 1986. More than 30 years have passed since Mugge started this film, which contains rare interviews with Rollins and his late wife, Lucille. It's full of performances and even convenes a trio of jazz critics to discuss Rollins' art. What took so long to get Colossus to the public? Well, we'll discuss that and more. By the way, you've probably seen Mugge's work before. His documentary archive, which is more than 35 films, includes Hellhounds on My Trail, The Afterlife of Robert Johnson, True Believers, The Musical Family of Rounder Records, The Kingdom of Zydeco, The Return of Reuben Blades, Gospel According to Al Green, and Cool Runnings, The Reggae Movie. Robert Mugge, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thank you, Bob. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. I know we're both keeping an eye out the window on the weather, so folks, if you hear any loud noises that do not seem planned, well, that's what's going on. Bob, I wanted to ask you, one of the things I really liked about your portrait of Sonny Rollins was the way he talked about his growth as a musician. He seems to be the first one to want to say that even as a professional, he still had a lot to learn, and did.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I actually made this film in 1986, and the things that Sonny says in it were circa 1986, and he very much believed that, as he says in the film, that he was still a developing musician. The interesting thing is, it's now 2017. I spoke to him a few months ago, and sadly, we've long referred to him, as you say, as the greatest living jazz improviser. That didn't start with us. Lots of other people referred to him as that, and still do. Although sadly, for medical reasons, he hasn't been allowed to play a saxophone the last several years. But even when I spoke to him recently, he still spoke of never feeling like he never quite got to what was in his head, that there was always this nirvana beyond for the saxophone that he was trying to get to. But, good God, he achieved more than any but just a handful of other jazz artists, through the decades. So he has nothing to be concerned about. But that's what Sonny's like. He just always was striving, always looking for something better, something bigger.
And what I found interesting was he seems to acknowledge that, he doesn't say that he got better. I think what he kind of indicates is that he knew that there was always room for improvement. And I think the historical record shows that he always got better. He tried different things. He changed. He grew.
And that's why we had the jazz critics in the film to discuss some of that. And as you know, showed both his traditional jazz side with an ensemble performance. Sonny, Clifton Anderson, Mark Soskin, Bob Cranshaw, and Marvin Smitty Smith at Opus 40 sculpted rock garden, rock sculpture, whatever it is, right, that he performed on in Saugerties, New York, in August of 1986. And then on the other hand, we filmed him doing something totally audacious, totally different for a jazz artist, which was composing his concerto for tenor saxophone and orchestra and premiering it with a Japanese orchestra, the Yomiuri Nippon Symphony Orchestra in Tokyo, Japan in May of 1986, performing throughout, playing with the orchestra as providing support and with arrangements and conducting provided by his good friend Heikki Sarmanto from Finland. But just to your point, that idea of his never quite being satisfied and everything, that concerto had multiple movements. He and his late wife Lucille asked me at the time not to use two of them because he wasn't satisfied with the way those two movements turned out. So that was fine because I already had such a large, potentially unwieldy film as it was. I needed an excuse to make the concerto section a little shorter. But his plan was to keep redoing that symphony, performing it again, recording it in the studio and everything until he got it right. But somehow he never got around to it. He performed it again in Italy, but never did record it in a studio. And so as a result, this is what's available. And in fact, that's really how the film came to be, is because my buddy Francis Davis, we were both living in Philadelphia at the time. I believe Francis still does. He had recently interviewed Sonny and Lucille Rollins, met them, found them very welcoming. And they had told him how Sonny had written this concerto and that the world premiere was scheduled for several months later in Tokyo, Japan. He told me that and then provided an introduction. And because I got so excited thinking, oh, my God, what if there had been cameras the first time John Coltrane played A Love Supreme, or the first time Duke Ellington did his sacred concerts? There are lots of similar moments in jazz where a respected jazz artist decided to try something big and ambitious, sometimes something that went over a little bit into the concert hall, into the classical area. But I thought, I have no idea how this is going to turn out, but I've got to find a way to be there and document it. And fortunately was able to raise the money from Britain's Channel 4 Television and some others to do it.
Well, and I want to ask you about, so you recorded him two performances, the one in Japan and the one in Socrates. How different is, and I don't know how many in your other documentaries that you wound up recording live performances for them. How difficult or different or challenging is it to capture that? Because I know you're not going in with the resources of, like, if Bruce Springsteen wants to record his concert, he's going to have 30 cameras, 30 cameramen. You don't have those resources for this type of project. So how do you get it done?
Well, I never had Bruce Springsteen scale resources, certainly. But a goal from the 1970s on for me has been to get as much, as good a resources as I can, and then to make it look like I have resources that much better. So most of the time over the years, I've used, 4 cameras. I've used, I actually used 5 with B.B. King in Mississippi in 2003, but 4 is usually the most I've ever had. And since 1982 with Gil Scott-Heron, I've always had multi-track recording trucks recording the music, and that we can remix later. I was one of the first people to use Steadicam in film at all, because my buddy Larry McConkie, who was the director of photography of most of my early films, was close friends with Garrett Brown, who invented it. And so, in fact, my film with Gil Scott-Heron was probably the first film to have Steadicam from beginning to end. So we've managed to have some decent resources, but you're right. There was a big difference in how we filmed in Saugerties, where we had the 4 cameras and the recording truck and all that, and what we had to do in Japan, because we didn't have money to organize huge, facilities over there. Fortunately, there was some corporate advantage to what we were doing. Yomiuri Shimbun is the world's biggest newspaper. It has the most readers of any newspaper in the world. They're a big corporation. Even at that time, they owned baseball teams. They owned the orchestra that commissioned the piece from Sonny. They owned the beautiful concert hall in which the piece was being premiered. And when we worked out with them to come over, they offered us whatever in return just for the Japanese home video rights. They gave us incredible support. The piece was premiering on a Sunday in May of 2006, and there were going to be 2 performances. The first performance was to be recorded and broadcast by a television channel that was owned by Yomiuri Shimbun. The second was to be recorded and broadcast by a radio channel owned by Yomiuri Shimbun. So they allowed us to film the television crew filming the first concert, and then the second concert where we were filming, I could only afford to bring over 2 cameramen and a sound man. But my sound man got a feed from the recording truck of the radio station. So that gave us the high quality audio. And, but I also went into this knowing, okay, I have 2 great cameramen, but I only have 2. And we were shooting film. So every 10 minutes, one or the other of those cameramen has to stop and reload, maybe losing a minute or 2. And so I knew going in that I was going to be shooting other things around Tokyo, things that would lend themselves to different visual themes for accompanying separate movements of the concerto. So that's what we did. We spent a week in Tokyo, filmed all sorts of other things to help illustrate, bring to life visually what we were doing in audio terms. But we also got wonderful footage of the performance itself.
I think that's called cover, right?
Covering our ass, actually.
Yeah. So what did you learn, either from your own experience or from Sonny, about the difference in response to him from the Japanese audience to, say, the American audience, or even the European audience? I know, because you mentioned the Channel 4 in the UK also helped you with funding for this.
Right. Well, obviously, he's worshipped in this country by anyone who cares at all about jazz. And he mentions in the film that he's always considered himself an ambassador for the U.S. He's been sent on tours around the world. He's gone on them in under all sorts of auspices, but I think he's been sent by the U.S. government different places as well. And in Japan, it flipped us out when we were there. And even in 1986, they had jazz magazines, monthly magazines that were this thick, like an inch thick. And he has huge fans there, and they treat him really, really well. And this seemed like a really obvious place to do this, because he's also well known, obviously, in Europe, the UK, I had already made 3 previous films for Channel 4 television in the UK. It was then a new 4th channel then. Now they have lots of channels, as we do, but prior to Channel 4, they only had 3 of them. And I was fortunate that Channel 4 was created to provide programming created by independent filmmakers, mostly UK filmmakers, but I was able to get in under the wire early on there, and also to serve minorities of all sorts, racial minorities, religious minorities, even business was considered a minority audience over there. So they backed it. And in fact, our world premiere was at the London Film Festival in November of 1986. And Sonny and I were both there on stage being interviewed by the Derek Malcolm, who was at that time the director of the festival, and had a wonderful experience presenting the film there. But yes, obviously over the years it's shown in many ways on television in many countries, on home video in many countries, in film festivals, and in briefly in theaters in other respects and all. But yes, he makes a point in the film about how much the Japanese love him and how much he loves them back. And in fact, he even makes the point that he's long wondered if the fact that his family is from the islands, the Caribbean, and as he says, Japan is an island. He wondered if and of course he plays songs like St. Thomas and Don't Stop the Carnival, which are island culture. He wonders if that fed into to their love and respect for him.
Now, I promised in the introduction that I would ask you about kind of the delay and it getting the distribution that it's getting now. So the movie got a theatrical release in '86. It was seen.
Modest one, yes.
Right.
A theatrical distributor was one of the funders.
And then did it actually disappear for 30 years, or has it been?
No. It's been continually in release in one way or another.
Okay.
For 31 years. A series of home video releases in various parts of the world, television on and off. Way back in summer of 1988 on PBS, I had a series of my music films. I took 6 of the films and cut them to 90-minute programs under the title Summer Night Music. So it was like my Al Green film, my Gil Scott-Heron film, my Ruben Blades film, my Sonny Rollins film, my reggae film, Cool Runnings, that we shot in Jamaica in 1983, and Hawaiian Rainbow, which I was just finishing as I was putting together a series, a film about Hawaiian music.
And so what's new this time is, I think you told me there's a 4K release now.
We did a 4K transfer at Technicolor in Montreal, which I oversaw from a distance, and then they sent everything to me. And here on this computer on which I'm speaking to you now, I spent weeks color correcting, remastering it, new HD video titles to replace the old film titles. I created a kind of a making of film that is available on this version, this release, Blu-ray, DVD, and digital formats, and also we provided just straight audio of the 2 songs that kind of bookend the film, G-Man, which was first heard when he performed it for this film, and Don't Stop the Carnival, one of his island-influenced classics.
So let's take a couple minutes and talk about some of the content in the film. One of the things I think that made Sonny so special, or makes Sonny so special, I don't want to speak about him in the past tense, I know he's retired, but he's still with us, was that he worked with his wife, Lucille. They weren't just married. She became his producer and promoter, manager.
Manager, yes.
Yeah. What did you observe back in '86 about their relationship and how they interacted and how?
Well, as I believe you know, I've dedicated this release to her memory. She died in 2004 after suffering a stroke in 2003. This film happened because of her. Sonny, in spite of his great ambition, his unbelievable achievement, is a rather self-deprecating, solitary person. He has always spent many hours every day rehearsing, building up his stamina. He was very early into all sorts of things, yoga and health foods and Rosicrucianism and all kinds of things to improve himself physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. But he's always, to some extent, doubting himself. I mean, he knows his greatness, you know, but at the same time, he's a little shy about some things. And it was Lucille who, fortunately, right at the time that I was thinking I'd love to make a film about Sonny, was thinking there needs to be a film about Sonny. There needs to be a way to show people that then in 1986 that he was at the absolute peak of his powers. Because as Francis Davis, Gary Giddens, Ira Gitler discuss in the film, there was this sense that at the time we made this film that his greatest albums were behind him, and that if you wanted to see great Sonny Rollins, you had to go see him in person. And so they have a discussion about, okay, well, some of the albums, especially since Sonny and Lucille had started recording them, producing them themselves, were actually of a very high quality. But you know, you're never going to get jazz fans to not think about their favorite classic, legendary albums. And it's funny. I have a friend who used to say about Bob Dylan, this was 30, 40 years ago, he'd always say, the best Dylan album is the previous one. It's not.
Always, right.
So, I mean, there is a certain sense, well, that a great artist's greatest work is always behind him or her. But so anyway, she loved the idea of us coming to film the concerto, of us also filming his band in concert. If I may, one of the key themes of the film for me originally, which I had to adapt slightly, but was this idea of islands. You know, as Sonny said, his parents came from the islands. He was born and grew up in Harlem, but the family was from the islands. And here we are shooting in, and he mostly lived in New York. He and his wife had a place in upstate New York, as well as an apartment in New York City. So he really was a lifelong New Yorker, which is an island, Manhattan, and of course the islands of Japan. So after we filmed him in Japan, what I wanted to do to further this notion of the islands and of him as a kind of an island, as a solitary genius, constantly improving himself, and you know, the whole thing about playing on the Williamsburg Bridge for a year and a half, you know, improving himself and not wanting to disturb his neighbors at his New York apartment and everything. So we initially were planning to film him. Lucille let me know that he was going to be performing on a boat, a little tourist ship going around Manhattan. Unfortunately, when I checked into it, I found out it was going to be at night, and they did not have the resources to give us power to power our lights and everything. So we had to give up on that and on the idea of this total through line of the island idea. So I asked Lucille, you know, where else is he going to be playing? And then she told me about this place, Opus 40, this guy, Harvey Feight, the late sculptor, had created this incredible, he had actually taken this rock quarry and sculpted it into essentially a gigantic sculpture that you can walk through, and it's surrounded by beautiful trees. And so Tad Richards, his stepson, has run it, overseen it for decades, and has concerts there every summer. And he was having Sonny Rollins perform that August, and so that's why we chose to film him there. And there's this sort of obelisk in the midst of it. He was on a 6 foot above the ground, this sort of rock ledge. He and the band were performing there, and then up behind them, which is how we start the performance in the film, is with the camera on that, and then with the Steadicam, and then moving down to where he's performing. But it stands up like a monument, like a colossus, and so that became a visual metaphor for Sonny as well. This Saxophone Colossus.
As you were talking about the idea of shooting him on the boat out around the island of Manhattan, I was thinking. I don't know if you saw a few months back, Melissa McCarthy did her Sean Spicer imitation on Saturday Night Live, but on the Segway connected to the speaker's podium. Wouldn't it be great if you could get like a Sonny Rollins type of musician to do that, and you could film them through the streets of New York performing like that? Maybe
We should call Lorne Michaels. And maybe they can at least do a satirical version. Yes, that was fabulous. The whole Melissa McCarthy satirical press conference, and then actually going down the street looking for Trump Tower and Trump and everything.
Exactly. Okay, so I got off topic there. You mentioned a couple of times about the critics being interviewed in the film, which was interesting. You had 3. There were supposed to be 4, right? Stanley Crouch was supposed to be
Stanley Crouch had said he would be there, and hey, all of us at some point or other make a commitment and don't follow through. But I was a little sad about it, because we would have at least had one prominent African American critic. It would have been nice to have him in the mix. It was a little funny the way it turned out, though, because I thought, well, at least Ira Gitler is from an earlier generation, and so he'll at least say, yeah, Sonny was great then. He's not as good now or something. But it was a total love fest. All 3 of these guys were just idolized to such a great extent, Sonny, that, they had lots of great information, but there was nobody contesting what anybody else said. Everyone said, yep, that's right. He's the greatest. He's the best. Nobody better.
They were kind of like a Greek chorus in that. And they'd pop up every so often. They tell you some things about how great the star of the film was, and then they'd disappear. And a little later, they'd reappear. It's kind of like they would come onto the stage to give him a few minutes to catch his breath, and then they'd talk, then they'd go off, and then Sonny would reappear. It's cool that way.
And I loved closing it with Lucille's remarks about how, Sonny's apartment, their apartment, was on a very high floor in New York City, not far from what now is known as the Ground Zero area and everything. And her talking about, she had told me this privately, so I asked her when the camera was running, so she repeated it, which is that she's often had this fantasy of taking a jazz critic up to that apartment and saying, oh, let me show you the view, and then a little closer, and then wham, like Hansel and Gretel and the Witch or something. But yes, and of course, I also intercut a bit of that 3-way interview with something really dramatic that happened during the Socrates concert, which is that. As I say, up on the band was performing up on this rather high ledge, and there was a 6-foot drop to the next level, and Sonny started doing a solo improvising, and so he's bringing in as he just want to do, bringing in all these great tunes, going in and out of them, playing occasional sounds that just would repeat, and just building something, and just love the way a great jazz artist can do that, and Sonny in particular. And but as we're filming, with these 4 cameras, one of them on a steady cam going around him and everything, he's becoming more and more disturbed, and he's like pacing back and forth like a caged animal or something. And suddenly he stops, he plays a note, and then he just jumps off the edge of the ledge, hits the ground, feet first, 6 foot below, falls onto his back, protecting the saxophone above him.
Of course.
And of course, because as Lucille says, probably cared more about it than he did Lucille, which she had accommodated herself to years before. Back in the 50s, I think, when they met, she realized it pretty quickly. But he just lay there, and the band is coming up to the edge, looking over, and people are standing up, gasping and really concerned. Is he knocked out cold or whatever? And all of a sudden, he puts one of his knees up, he puts the other leg over it, and he starts to play Autumn Nocturne, and the lead into Autumn Nocturne. And so all of a sudden there's this giant exhale through the whole place, and the band members start laughing, and they slowly start playing along with him, up from the higher level. And they proceeded to play the whole song. I left my post with my headphones, talking to the cameras and my video monitors from the film cameras and everything. And I ran around to the back where no one could see me and asked, are you okay? Do you want to stop and everything? He said he was okay, and they continued to play. He did get back to his feet. I think Tad Richards and somebody else helped him to his feet, and he said no, he wanted to continue playing. So he did. He played a few more numbers there. And then at the end of the show, the Tad Richards and one of his volunteers helped Sonny and Lucille to their car, and Lucille took him to a nearby hospital where it turned out he had broken his heel, which he pretty much knew that something was not right. But so, I asked him in the interview, what was this about? As I actually also did that day. And he said, well, sometimes in a concert, I like to stroll out into the audience, play directly to people and everything. A number of artists do that. I've seen Buddy Guy do that. I've been in an audience where he comes up and just kind of plays his guitar into my face and everything. And, it's a fun thing. You feel like you're part of the show in a way. But Lucille later told me that Sonny had told her that, in fact, he was having a nervous breakdown up there. The reason is, after the May, if you look at the May footage in Tokyo, the saxophones, it's not that bright. It's a little tarnished, as these reed instruments will become over the years. And in between that May concert in Tokyo and the August concert in Saugerties, New York, he had it lacquered. The danger with having a horn lacquered, as I learned at that time, is that it can change the tone, sometimes radically. And you have to try to get used to its different sort of performance. So what was happening, as he described it to her, was he would go to play a vowel and out would come a consonant. Oh. And so, like any brilliant jazz artist, an Ornette Coleman, whoever, there, in a way, you can never play a wrong note, because you play something unexpected, then you'll build on that. You'll build a melodic structure that incorporates that. And so that's what he was trying to do up there, but these squawks kept coming out. And so he would, okay, we'll do squawks then. But just finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't think of any other way to make this stop than to jump off, and he broke his heel. But just for me, you know, there's no greater example of how, well, as Francis Davis says in the film, of how much he has invested in this, in any performance that he does. It's so important to him, and he was having a nervous breakdown because he had lost, because of the lacquering, he had lost the ability to precisely create the structures that he was wanting to create. So it immediately became a legendary moment in jazz history. As Gary Giddens, when, you know, we went to interview those guys, said, yeah, everybody's talking about what happened when you filmed up at Socrates, you know. And so it was, you know, when you're making a film, a lot of times, you know, you do a lot of research in advance and you kind of think out what the structure might be and everything. But all along the way, you're trying to stay open to what life gives you, what the world gives you, what the unexpected. Just like he incorporates as he goes the surprise things that happen to him or come to him. I have to do the same thing. And so not getting to do all island stuff made it a different film. The things that we shot around Tokyo made it a different film. His jumping off the ledge and breaking his heel made it a different film, added whole other levels to it. So the fun part for me as a filmmaker, as a documentary filmmaker, is just as he is there in real time creating, I get to do the same thing, create and interpret as we go.
All right. Well, Bob, the last thing I want to ask you is, what are you doing now? This was your film from 1986, and I know you've produced a tremendous archive of films. Are you working on a new film now?
And in fact, people can find many of my past films and even recent films, find clips of them at robertmugge.com. That's Mugge, robertmugge.com. And if you go there on the homepage, you'll find information about the dozens of them that are available via home video, including 22 of them. As the Sonny Rollins film, Saxophone Colossus, comes out on August 4th, it will be the 22nd film that MVD has released or re-released over the last couple of years. And you can, as you know, find them to purchase on Blu-ray, on DVD, as digital streaming or downloads from Amazon.com and any number of other places. I have a non-musical film that I'm trying to finish. I'm out applying for money. It's a film about the longtime former ABC News national and international correspondent, bureau chief, the original news anchor of Good Morning America for the first 11 years. His name is Steve Bell. And, you know, he covered Vietnam, the wars in Vietnam and Cambodia, covered Watergate, urban riots, the shootings of presidents and others over the years. Incredible career. I mean, he was on the stage with Bobby Kennedy holding a microphone in front of his face, you know, seconds before Bobby Kennedy then went down the hall and was killed. But, you know, I have footage of him when he was still a local reporter, anchor in Omaha, Nebraska. I have him covering the aftermath of the John F. Kennedy assassination in Dallas, with the Martin Luther King assassination, all these things. Anyway, it's a film called Steve Bell Storyteller, a newsman living history. And so it's essentially complete, but I have to do a little more shooting with him and his buddy Ted Koppel, and also his buddy Mort Krim, who was the model for Will Ferrell's kind of loving parody in Anchorman 1 and 2. But I need $100,000 just for the good copies of the ABC News footage that has to run throughout it and everything. So that's one of the things. I'm right now doing a. I'm talking to a very prominent female soul artist who was included in my 2004 project Blues Divas that was hosted by Morgan Freeman. We're talking about doing a big documentary on her life and career. I've currently got a Kickstarter campaign going, which unfortunately is probably going to fail. I've had real enthusiasm from a whole lot of people, but it looks like not enough to get the money raised, because in 2004, I made a film called Deep Sea Blues that involved my shooting the January 2007 Legendary Rhythm and Blues Cruise. And so we made a 2-hour film out of that. But, you know, I had 4 cameras and 2 multi-track recording setups at each end of one at each end of the ship. So recorded whole concerts by tons of artists, you know, Otis Clay and Michael Burks and Tab Benoit and Deanna Bogart and Lil Ed and the Blues Imperials, all kinds of great people. So I have these like whole sets by all of them. So what I want to do is release a 3.5-hour film of sections of 8 of these. Commander Cody, you know, so many great people from this, you know, for historical preservation. So I'm trying to raise enough money just to pay the bills to get this out. But it's temporarily called Pieces of 8, Deep Sea Blues 2. But I'm probably going to fail, sadly, but, you know, I'm still trying. I'd have till July 21st of 2017 to raise the money I need. We have another project that involves how Maharishi Mahesh Yogi decided to bring his North American operations to Fairfield, Iowa, of all places, and how they have a Maharishi University there and everything. And so I have various projects going, some of them music related directly, some of them with music in them just tangentially.
All right. Well, folks, look, if you want to see or own Saxophone Colossus, the film we've been talking about at great length today, you can go, if you're on MrMedia.com, you can order it from us. Right below the video that you're looking at, probably to the right, you'll see the cover, the DVD cover. You can click on that. You can order it from Amazon immediately. You can also download it if you want to see it right now. It's available in multiple formats. We mentioned DVD, Blu-ray, 4K. Probably you can watch it on any number of services. It's all out there. You can also find Robert Mugge's other films the same way. You mentioned your website. It's robertmugge.com, MUGGE.com. Are you on Twitter and Facebook?
I am heavily on Facebook. I just can never, as you can tell, I'm so long-winded, I could never picture myself just doing tweets, you know. But I have a personal and a business Facebook page, and I post there a lot. Clips from my films, sometimes outtakes that are never seen by anybody except my my so-called Facebook friends and everything. Often, as you and I talked about before the interview, on a musician's birthday or when a musician passes or whatever, or has something exciting going on in their lives, I'll post related clips. Like this past weekend, my good friend Betty Levette performed here locally, and so I posted something I had filmed of her in 2004 at the Blues Awards in Memphis, both doing a performance and receiving an award and so forth. So that's typical. And the other day was the late Pinetop Perkins's 104th birthday, so I posted a clip of Pinetop Perkins, and this is pretty regular. Junior Kimbrough's birthday's coming up. I'm sure I'll be posting the Junior Kimbrough portion of my film, my 1991 film, Deep Blues, which incidentally, Dave Stewart of Eurythmics, who funded the film, is looking to relaunch it very soon in all sorts of ways, including possibly theatrical. So we're in the midst of a long process of preparing that for re-release. So
very cool. Good to see you got a lot of stuff going on. You're keeping busy, and really enjoyed this film, Saxophone Colossus. Bob Mugge, thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media today.
Thank you, Bob. It's been a pleasure.
Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience full of finger snappers and toe tappers who can talk, unconvincingly, for hours about the meaning of jazz in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida.
Hi, this is Rich Scheidner. And if you've ever wondered what it was like to be a stand-up comedian in the 1980s, I'm going to do you a big favor. Instead of billions of dollars for a time machine, you can just spend $24.95 and buy my new book, Kicking Through the Ashes, My Life as a Stand-Up in the 1980s Comedy Boom. It will save you money and give you thrills. It will take you there. Go to my website, richscheidner.com, go to amazon.com, and buy this book.